This is Jessie, and you're listening to the Curious Cabinet Podcast. On today's podcast, we're going to peel back the layers of history's darkest crimes and the failures that let them happen. We're diving into a case that shook Britain to its core, a story of betrayal, injustice, and a man who paid the ultimate price for crimes he didn't commit. This is the tragic story of Timothy Evans of 10 Rillington Place, where a serial killer's deception and a flawed system stole lives and shattered trust. It's a story that changed laws, haunted families, and still echoes today. So settle in. This is one of Britain's most infamous carriages of injustice. Let's begin. Picture London, 1949. The city is still scarred from the Blitz. Its streets lined with crumbling tenements and ration books still in use. In Notting Hill, a rundown street called Rillington Place sits quietly, its terraced houses hiding secrets behind peeling paint and cracked windows. At number 10, a young couple, Timothy and Beryl Evans, are struggling to survive in a tiny top-floor flat. Downstairs lives their landlord, John Christie, a man who seems respectable but harbors a darkness no one suspects. This house, this street, will become the stage for a tragedy that will echo for decades. Let's start with Timothy. Timothy was born in 1929 in, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, so I apologize if I don't, Merthyr Tydfil, Wales. Timothy was a quiet man who mostly kept to himself. He grew up in a working-class family, but life wasn't kind to him. His father abandoned the family when Timothy was young, leaving his mother, Thomasina, to raise him and his siblings alone. Timothy struggled in school, not because he lacked effort, but because he had a low IQ, estimated around 70, and could barely read or write. He left school at age 11, his education cut short by poverty and health issues, including tuberculosis of the foot that caused chronic pain. And I didn't know that you could get tuberculosis in your foot, but until I did my research on this case. But it pretty much just swells the foot and it messes up the bones and it leaves you scarred for life. It messes you up forever. But in his early 20s, he was working as a van driver in London, a job that paid little but kept him afloat. In 1947, Timothy met Beryl Thorley, a spirited 19-year-old with a quick smile and a fiery temper. They married in 1948, a whirlwind romance that soon faded once the realities of post-war hardship came to light. The couple moved into 10 Rillington Place, a damp, cramped flat where the walls seemed to hold the chill of the city itself. The rent was cheap, but the house was grim. Shared facilities, thin walls, and a pervasive smell of coal dust and mildew. Their landlord, John Christie, and his wife, Ethel, lived downstairs, their presence a constant in the Evans' lives. Beryl was lively but impulsive, and the couple's marriage was very turbulent. They argued often, usually about money, which was always short in supply. In October of 1948, Beryl gave birth to their daughter, Geraldine, a bright spot in their strained lives. But the joy was fleeting. The added responsibility of a child stretched their finances thinner, and Timothy's modest wages couldn't keep up. By late 1949, Beryl was pregnant again, a second child they couldn't afford. Abortion was illegal in Britain, punishable by prison, and the couple faced a desperate choice. The landlord, John Christie, was 50 years old and an odd figure. He was soft-spoken with a thin frame and a receding hairline. He carried an air of quiet authority. He'd served in World War I, worked briefly as a policeman, and claimed medical knowledge from his time as a military clerk. To Timothy and Beryl, he seemed trustworthy and even kind. He offered to help with their problem, claiming he could perform an abortion safely. Desperate and naive, the couple agreed. Unknown to them, it was a decision that would unravel everything. So let's take a second to look at who John Christie really was, because understanding him is really the key to this whole story. Born in 1889 in Yorkshire, Christie had a troubled past. His domineering father and strict upbringing left him with deep resentment and a need for control. As a young man, he racked up convictions for theft and assault, including attacks on women. During World War I, he was gassed, which left him with a weak voice and perhaps a chip on his shoulder. By the 1940s, he'd reinvented himself as a respectable man, married to Ethel, working as a clerk, and even rejoining the police reserve after the war. But beneath this facade was a predator. Christie was a necrophile and serial killer, though no one at 10 Rillington Place knew it yet. On November 8th, 1949, everything changed. Timothy went to work, leaving Beryl at home with Christie, who was supposed to be performing an abortion. When Timothy returned, Beryl was gone. Christie met him with a grim story. The procedure had gone wrong. Beryl was dead, and he'd hidden her body in the wash house to protect Timothy. He warned that the police would never believe their story and urged Timothy to flee. As for Geraldine, Christie promised to arrange for her care with a couple in East Action. Timothy, grief-stricken, terrified, and easily manipulated due to his limited intellect, believed him. Overwhelmed, Timothy fled to Wales, staying with his aunt and uncle in Merthyr Tydfil. For weeks he wrestled with the guilt and fear, his mind replaying Christie's words. On November 30th, unable to bear the weight, he walked into a police station and told a confused story. At first, he said he'd accidentally killed Beryl with abortion pills he'd bought. Then he changed his story, saying Christie had performed the abortion and caused her death. The police, suspicious of his inconsistencies, sent officers to 10 Rillington Place. The search wasn't very thorough at first. The wash house, a small outbuilding in the backyard, was locked, and Christie claimed he just didn't have the key. The police accepted this and left. Days later, on December 2nd, they returned with a warrant. In the wash house, hidden under a pile of wood, they found Beryl's body, strangled with rope, her face bruised. Nearby, wrapped in a blanket, was 14-month-old Geraldine, also strangled. This discovery was horrific, and the police turned their focus on Timothy. Timothy was arrested and brought back to London under intense questioning. He broke down and signed a confession that he'd killed both Beryl and Geraldine. But the confession was riddled with holes. Timothy's low literacy meant he barely understood the statement he signed, and his story kept shifting, sometimes implicating Christie, sometimes not. The police, eager for a quick resolution, ignored these red flags. They had their suspect, and they wanted to move on. A trial began on January 11th, 1950, at the Old Bailey. The prosecution's case was brutal. Timothy was a violent, jealous husband who killed Beryl in a rage after an argument about her pregnancy, then murdered Geraldine to cover it up. They leaned heavily on the signed confession despite its contradictions. The defense argued that Timothy was innocent, that Christie was the real killer, but they had no hard evidence. Timothy took the stand, but his emotional testimony and limited articulation hurt more than it helped. He seemed confused, unable to counter the prosecution's narrative. Then came John Christie's testimony. He took the stand as a prosecution witness, calm and composed, his war veteran status and former police role lending him credibility. He denied any involvement in Beryl's death, claiming Timothy had confessed to him about killing her. Christie's wife, Ethel, corroborated his story, saying Timothy was often violent. The jury, swayed by Christie's respectability and Timothy's apparent unreliability, believed the landlord over the laborer. After just 40 minutes of deliberation, they found Timothy guilty of Geraldine's murder, the only charge tried, as it was considered the stronger case. The judge sentenced him to death. Timothy's mother, Thomasina, fought tirelessly to save him. She wrote letters, pleaded with officials, and insisted her son was innocent, but the appeals process was swift and unforgiving. On March 9, 1950, Timothy Evans was led to the gallows at Pentonville Prison. His final words were a desperate plea. "I didn't do it. Christie did it." The trapdoor opened, and he was gone. A life extinguished, a family broken, and a truth buried. For 3 years, the case seemed closed. Timothy was branded a murderer. But in March 1953, the house at 10 Rillington Place revealed its secrets. New tenants, renovating the flat, discovered a hidden cupboard sealed behind wallpaper. Inside were the bodies of three women: Rita Nelson, Kathleen Maloney, and Hectorina McLennan, all strangled. Further searches uncovered Ethel Christie's body under the floorboards and 2 more victims, Muriel Eady and Ruth First, buried in the garden. John Christie, the respectable landlord, was a serial killer. Christie fled but was arrested on March 31st, 1953, near Putney Bridge. Under interrogation, he confessed to killing the women, including Beryl Evans, admitting he'd strangled her during the supposed abortion. His accounts of Geraldine's death were vague. He denied killing her but hinted at involvement, saying he'd found her dead. The police, now realizing their mistake, were horrified. Christie was tried for Ethel's murder, convicted, and hanged on July 15, 1953. But the damage was already done. The revelation sparked national outrage. How had the police missed a serial killer living under their noses? Why had they believed Christie over Timothy? The case exposed a multitude of failures. The initial search of 10 Rillington Place was sloppy. Officers failed to check the wash house thoroughly or investigate Christie's criminal history, which included convictions for violence against women. The police relied on Timothy's coerced confession, ignoring his low intellect and the pressure he was under. Class prejudice played a role too. Timothy, a poor Welsh laborer, was an easy scapegoat, while Christie's polished demeanor and middle-class status shielded him. The public demanded answers. Timothy's mother, Thomasina, led the charge, campaigning for her son's exoneration. Inquiries were launched, including one by Home Office barrister John Scott Henderson in 1953. But it controversially held Timothy's guilt, claiming Christie's confession about Beryl was unreliable. The report was widely criticized as a whitewash, fueling public distrust. Over the next decade, journalists, activists, and MPs like Ludwig Kennedy, whose book 10 Rillington Place became a bestseller, kept the case alive, arguing Timothy had been innocent. The pressure eventually paid off. In 1965, a second inquiry by High Court Judge Sir Daniel Brabham re-examined the evidence. Brabham concluded that Timothy likely did not kill Geraldine, though he controversially suggested Timothy might have killed Beryl, a finding many rejected given Christie's confession. On October 18, 1966, Timothy Evans was granted a posthumous royal pardon, his conviction quashed. It was a bittersweet victory for Thomasina, who lost her son to a system that failed him. The Evans case didn't just clear one man's name, it changed Britain. Alongside other wrongful convictions, like that of Derek Bentley, hanged in 1953 for a murder he didn't commit, exposed the irreversible horror of the death penalty. Public support for abolition grew, and in November 1965, Parliament passed the Murder Act, abolition of the death penalty, suspending capital punishment for murder. In 1969, it was made permanent for most cases, and by 1998, the death penalty was abolished entirely in the UK. Timothy's case was a turning point, a stark reminder that no system is infallible, and mistakes can cost lives. But the reforms went beyond the death penalty. The Evans case highlighted the dangers of relying on confessions without scrutiny. It led to improvements in police training, emphasizing the need to verify statements and consider suspects' mental capacity. The introduction of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in 1984, though years later, owed some of its protections, like recorded interrogations and access to legal counsel, to cases like this. The tragedy also exposed how class and social status could sway justice, prompting calls for fairer treatment of marginalized defendants. So let's reflect on the human cost. Beryl Evans was just 19, trapped by poverty and desperation, her life cut short by a predator. Geraldine, barely 14 months old, was an innocent caught in a nightmare. Timothy, a man of limited means and intellect, was failed by a system that didn't listen. His mother, Thomasina, lived with the pain of losing her son and the fight to restore his name. And the other victims of Christie, Ruth, Muriel, Rita, Kathleen, Hectorina, and Ethel, were women whose lives were erased by a man who hid behind respectability. The story of Timothy Evans lingers like a shadow. It's a warning of what happens when we trust appearances over evidence, when we rush to judgment, when we fail the vulnerable. 10 Rillington Place is gone now, demolished in the 1970s, but its legacy endures in the laws it changed and the questions it raised. Justice, as we've learned, is fragile. It demands vigilance, compassion, and the courage to admit mistakes. If you have any requests for any cases you'd like to hear me cover, leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and to find me on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Until next week, guys.